This is Sewer Shark, released in 1992 for the Sega CD add-on for your Sega Genesis 16-bit high-definition video game console. Apparently this sold enough copies that it would later be the pack-in title for the revised Sega CD model that would come along later, and conveniently enough, for the purposes of this video at least, is one of many games included in the second Sega Genesis mini console in North America. Japan's Mega Drive Mini 2 console doesn't have Sewer Shark, but it also has a slightly better selection of games, but I digress. Anyway, one of many games released by Digital Pictures, makers of One Too Many FMV games that defined the early days of CD-ROM gaming. I could go into the deeper history about how these were intended for a different platform that would run off VHS tapes that never came to fruition, but it really doesn't matter, does it? So they made a bunch of these full-motion video games, Sewer Shark, Night Trap, Double Switch to name a couple, the list goes on, and a couple of these have seen modern remasters on modern platforms for some indecipherable reason. Amazingly, Sewer Shark is not one of those games. Not yet anyway, they'll come around eventually. And that's a bit of a shame because of the three games mentioned, it's actually the better game, and that's not even on a curve. It's actually... A lot of these full-motion video experiences get an oftentimes deservingly bad rap, and I myself generally don't care for these sorts of things. Sewer Shark, while still largely a full-motion video experience, is at least something resembling a proper video game. For it is a first-person rail shooter of sorts where you control your little crosshairs around the screen to point and shoot at things, which will either register a hit or not because the hit detection can be somewhat wonky at times, and sometimes you'll be prompted to change directions when you're flying through the tubes, which changes the running footage and such so that you continue onwards or you crash into a wall or something. Very high concept stuff for the 80s when this was originally made, or whatever the case may be. Anyway, backtracking a bit. You are a new member of the Sewer Shark people who must drive their Sewer Shark thing through the sewers to kill mutant vermin and collect enough of them to win a trip to Solar City, which is apparently a big deal in the world of Sewer Shark. A lot of the cutscenes are the various characters talking to you via on-screen communiques or in-person interaction as if you're another physical person on the scene or something. Something of a staple among these digital picture things. And listen, let's be real here, right? This is straight up hokey B-movie schlock playing out before your very eyes. The sort of thing that would go straight to video back in the day. You've got no-name actors hamming it up with stereotype caricatures you'd recognize as parodies of other such things. The production looks a bit low-rent and grimy, and the plot, let's be honest, is a bit thin. But there is a charm to these scenes that you can't help but admire, or even crack a bit of a smile at. If you like schlock, simply put, you'll get a kick out of these because they do make the game much more livelier. Whatever you want to say about the quality of Digital Pictures' output when it comes to the interactive side of things, when it comes to the movie portions, the acted portions, it's usually quality cheese, and I'm okay with that. I like cheese. Cheese is good. Unless it's moldy, then it's bad. Now, fortunately, in the case of Sewer Shark, the interactive portions of the program is just fine. You control your aim with the D-pad while the ship moves along the tunnels. You shoot vermin to meet a quota in order to progress onwards, or else you will lose the game. Said quota usually requires you to achieve a certain score, as well as maintain a certain energy level by the time you reach a certain point in the sewers. Your energy level is constantly draining as you're moving through the sewers, and shooting your guns will also drain energy, so it's important to make every shot count, which might be a tad difficult considering you're not sure whether a hit is registered until you run over a rat or a bat blows up or whatever the case may be. Every so often you'll be given instructions on where to go, usually in a sequence of 3 coordinates. Whenever a tunnel is coming up, an arrow lights up on top, at which point you hold down the B button and press the direction in question. If you follow the directions precisely, you'll be fine, but if you mess up too many times, you'll eventually crash into a wall or something. You're assigned different, somewhat degrading call signs throughout your run. Dog meat, rat breath, that sort of thing. These are essentially your rank. And each new rank brings about new threats and new kinds of vermin for you to tackle, along with tighter quotas for you to meet, which again means game over if it's not met after a certain point. Naturally, the farther you play, the more difficult the game becomes due to the higher quota demands and the tougher challenges presented before you. Despite this, Sewer Shark's gameplay is relatively simple. Well, once you learn the controls, because without a manual or any sort of external aid, you wouldn't know to hold down B while pressing a direction to change tunnels, or move left or right to use a recharge station and regain that precious energy that you need to keep playing. And even that isn't a sure thing, as sometimes recharge stations usually run parallel to another entryway that has no energy, and all you're given is a heads up on upcoming recharges, not which direction the station is actually located in. These little bits aren't explained in-game, so it is a learning process. Also, controlling your crosshairs with the D-pad is certainly not the most ideal method, and hit detection can also be a bit of a hassle. Sometimes you'll strike a target, but it won't register as a hit until a second or so later when the animation killing off the critter actually plays, giving you the impression that you didn't quite hit the critter and prompting you to shoot more, which costs energy and could also eventually lead to... It's these quibbles that are a nuisance at first, but eventually becomes problematic late in the game when things get really hectic. However, once you get a feel for how Sewer Shark operates, it's not too bad of a game. A bit on the shallow side, sure, but compared to some of the other stuff of this ilk at the time, it is still something resembling a video game you can play and comprehend. Oh, to a certain degree at least. Sewer Shark on Sega CD looks grimy, appropriate in some ways due to the idea of taking place in the sewers, but I also mean that in a technical sense. There's obviously a lot of video involved, both in terms of the intermissions and also in terms of gameplay, because it's constantly streaming video playing while some interactive elements float over this video, an effect similarly achieved in the later release Rebel Assault. One of the drawbacks of Sega CD is the limited Genesis color palette, so the picture quality is a bit on the grainy side, it's not all that great, and whatever production they put into these things originally is hampered by the low tech of the hardware. Now in fairness, I've seen far worse quality on Sega CD. But that's not exactly high praise by any means. Even the best quality video on the platform isn't all that great, but until you came across something better at the time, this was what you had to make do with. Sound-wise, meh. The video portions sound alright all things considered, with some stock soundtrack music playing in the background, while the in-game portions grace you with some traditional Mega Drive synthesizer musical stuff, which is inoffensive but otherwise unmemorable. Sound effects are nice and crisp for what it's worth, but that's about it really. Overall, Sewer Shark on Sega CD is actually not that bad. It gets a bad rap and often grouped with the dregs of this frankly terrible digression of video gaming that the industry somehow decided is worth reviving today for the sake of quote-unquote game preservation or whatever marketing bollocks they come up with to fool the nostalgia marks who'll eat this shit up no matter how marked up the prices are. But as a real shooter of sorts, while not one of the better ones that I've played, it's still pretty decent. Again, it's simple, straightforward, fairly functional for the most part. The video is less of a detraction of the experience and more of a compliment. And once you get a feel for how things operate, there is quite a bit of fun to be had here. So, yeah, there you go. Sewer Shark. Better than people will have you believe. And coming from someone who absolutely despises these full motion video things, that's actually saying something, so take that for what it's worth.